Hey everyone, it's Chris from Line Punch Forge. Today we're going to go over a little basic prong setting or basket setting. So these guys are the basket setting template set that I sell on linepunchforge.com. Comes with a 4, 5, 6, and 8 design. And for today we're just going to use the little 4 here. So show how to make a little basket setting for a cabochon. So for this project, we're going to be using a couple different gauges of wire. This little fella is a 14 gauge, and we're going to be using him for our prongs. Now 14 gauge is a really beefy prong size. You can use anything between 14 to I've used as small as 20 depending on how small the stone is. Now the little cullet that's going to support the stone is going to be a little 10 gauge wire. This is also pretty substantial, and you don't have to go this big, but it's much easier for me to go with kind of the bigger stuff for videos because it's a little easier to see. So here we are going to go ahead and get started. I've got my 10 gauge wire here, and I'm going to wrap that fella around a mandrel. And the idea here is that I create a circle, a jump ring. That jump ring is going to be just slightly under or just slightly over the circumference of that cabochon. In this case, I'm using a 10 millimeter rose quartz. So I'm going to go ahead and do the saw thing with the haymaker and just cut my jump ring. Right here I have some Pepe blade butter in a little tiny syringe, and I like applying it that way. That way it's, as you can see, dripping on my bench pin, but it allows me to apply it in a very accurate kind of way. I'm not going to make you guys sit through all the sawing, so we're going to go ahead and transition until, there we go, magically it's cut. And I'm going to show kind of exactly the sizing for a cabochon like this. Now, this sizing when you're making a cullet for like a faceted stone is going to be very similar. You're going to want the bottom cullet of your faceted stone to not be visible as you're looking down over the top of it, because ideally that little cullet, that first cullet you're making, is going to be one that's going to act as your bearing surface for the stone to sit on. In this case, we're just doing a little flat top. So here is the stone on the ring. Some of that area is going to be a little bit eaten away later on, as you see. And here is probably my favorite tip of this video. I'm using some, I think it's 3M or Loctite blue sticky tack. And I like to put little tiny pieces in that sticky tack to hold. I tend to have some issues with my wrists sometimes, fingers, carpal tunnel, I'm sure is what it is. So having something larger, something more gross to hold on to versus something fine allows me to work more comfortably. So this is what's nice about that sticky tack. And when it's all kind of worn out, all nasty, I throw that whole thing in my refining bucket, because who knows what kind of precious metal is stuck in that thing by the time I end up getting done with it. So right now what we're doing is filing the top of that jump ring that is going to be the base of the cabochon to sit on, because I want a nice flat bearing surface for it to seat on. And then once I have that all finished up, I'm going to start marking out where I want my prongs. So here you can see the finished jump ring with that flat surface on it for me to place my cabochon on. And then we will go from there. This video is going to be chock full of fun tips. Here's the cabochon on that flat surface, and then there you go. That's what it looks like. Easy way to file something flat, especially if it's a small jump ring. So the jump ring is now soldered. For this one, I like taking a little solder pallium and wedging it between the two surfaces of the jump ring and then soldering it, and that makes a nice clean surface. What I'm doing here is I'm trying to arrange my jump ring on my template so that my solder joint is right at where one of the prongs are going to be. The more you can hide those solder joints behind another element, the better. So I'm not accurately marking out my 4 prongs at the moment. What I'm doing is kind of generally putting some stuff on there, and I'm going to use my straight edge to mark it. And by straight edge, I mean, here's the next tip. I'm going to use my saw blade. So the saw blade, when stretched, is a nice straight surface. So I can use it as a straight edge to slightly mark those prong outlines on my black marker. And then we'll go ahead and cut them with a ball burr, or excuse me, a cylinder burr. What I'm doing here is finding a cylinder burr that is just slightly smaller than my 14 gauge wire. So I'm gonna go ahead and put this fella in a ring vise, because again, holding something small with your fingers, especially if you have carpal tunnel or wrist problems, can be problematic. So anytime you can hold that in something larger, more comfortable, longer you're able to work, and the less general pain you may have. Now, as I'm going through the speed up version of this, using my cylinder burr to make my little prong seats, you can see that I'm bracing my fingers in a couple different areas. I'm bracing the bench pin, I'm bracing the ring holder, and then my fingers are kind of stabilizing the flex shaft as I use it. That's going to give you some of the most accurate cutting. So here we are, all 4 little seats cut out. And one of those seats is going to be hidden, or is going to be hiding my solder joint. And wait for it. There you go. So next we'll move on to our soldering. Okay, forgive the shameless product placement, but here is the Axis soldering stand. Folds up flat. It's a quadrant. It's not a trivet. It's got your lazy, I call it a lazy Chris, because I don't really like calling it a lazy Susan. I'd rather call it a lazy Chris. And then your 6x6 solderite pad goes on there. Put all my stuff on there, my 4-prong basket setting, all that. Now, I'm going to be using Hold It. You can get this through Pepe Tools, and it's made by my friend Renee Ford from Renee Ford Metals. Before we do that, we need to cut our prongs, though. So I'm using about 1 inch per prong in this 14 gauge wire. And I'm just going to snippety snip snip. Snip. Do it. Snip it. Snip it. There you go. Good job. There's 3. And 1 more, if my math is correct, is 4. There we go. So you can either use hard solder. I really like to pick solder, but in this case, I'm going to shamelessly plug another product, Pepe Tools Bench Basics Nano Paste, which works really well for this technique. So I'm going to put my template in the soldering clay. I'm going to insert my prongs. Try and get them down deep into that clay. It all depends on what you want. You can have them sticking out. You don't necessarily need to use the clay. I just find the clay more useful for this type of thing, especially when it comes to a little longer stuff, a little bigger stuff. You can push those prongs down in the clay and possibly even protect them from those unfortunate heat control issues where you may melt a prong. I'm guilty of that. In fact, the first video I filmed, I accidentally melted a prong because I got distracted by something shiny, looked in the opposite direction while using a torch, and then when I looked back, my prong was melted. So here we are, video number 2. I'd like to think this one is better. So now that we have our prongs in our template, I'm going to apply a bit of paste to the top where they all connect. Just a little smudge. And then we'll go ahead and heat it up. You're going to see the clay turn a little bit white as it starts to dry out. But as you're going to see a couple times in this video, that it can be rehydrated. So I just dip it in my quench, throw it back in my bucket from whence it came. And by the time I use it again, it'll be nice and hydrated. So here we go. We've got a little ball up. And I'm going to add just a little bit more heat to try and, there we go. See the solder flow. Perfect. Turn that torch off. There we go. And now I'm just going to pick that up. I'm going to quench this entire thing. The titanium can be quenched. It's not that big of an issue. And then we're going to go ahead and pull the whole thing out of the clay. That's what I end up with. And then the clay is going to go back in the clay bin for further use. Now we're going to go ahead and pry this guy out of the template. Put the template aside, and I'm left with this little nice little kind of arranged in 4-prong. Now this is a little tedious and it's hard to kind of see on video. I'm going to take that little bearing surface cullet that I made, and I'm going to wedge it into the little solder teepee I just made. And once you get it all fit in so all 4 prongs slide in, if you did it right, arranged nice and perfectly for your cullet, and all you need to do now is push it down, arrange it. I'll squish those prongs a little bit tighter to my cullet so that I have a nice tight soldering surface for that solder to flow into and hold nice and tight. And in this case, we're going to go back to the soldering clay and put it just right down in to hold it upright. So this is what it looks like before we apply our solder and stick it into the clay. Hold it. Not like, the clay. Not like, hang on a minute. Different thing. So here we're going to stick it down under our hold it and just kind of get it arranged nice and tidy like. Alright, so we got our paste solder. I'm going to go ahead and apply that to the little joints here. I'll save you the pain of looking at my hairy knuckles and allow you to just kind of see the soldering side of that. So here we are all set up. I'm going to grab my torch and start just kind of, don't forget the Bench Basics Smart Flux. I'm going to throw a little bit of that on. You're going to see it kind of spritz, and then when I apply the heat, it'll turn kind of white. What that is a barrier flux. It's going to kind of stop fire scale or fire staining from happening, and it's going to keep the piece of metal nice and clean as I'm doing my heating. So now I'm just going to kind of dry out that solder, dry out that barrier flux, and then I'm going to heat it and watch the solder flow in my little prongs. See the clay again turning white? That's okay. The only time I end up taking a little bit of my clay out of the mix when it's time to put it back in the containers, if the clay turns black, if it's burnt, I'll scratch that off, and then I'll just throw the rest back in my container for rehydration. So here we go. Should be nice, and I was waiting for one prong there to flow. It didn't quite go like I wanted it to, but then I was able to make it happen. So here we go. I think I'm looking for my solder pick to go ahead and pick that up, and yeah, let's go ahead and quench that whole thing. And here we are. I'm gonna scrape off that black stuff there, and then I'm gonna throw the rest of my hold it right back into the container that holds it, and then throw this fella in the pin polisher. So this is what it looks like when it comes out of my pin polisher. And again, with the blue sticky tack, I'm going to be using this to hold it so that I can cut my prongs a little bit shorter. So I'm going to cut it just about the height of the cabochon, and that gives me room to go ahead and file them later on. Now, this is not a stone setting video, so you won't see me setting this. This is just a construction video. So here we are. That fits in there nice. And we're going to go ahead and look at Captain Harry Knuckles again. And all I'm doing is cutting those prongs a little bit shorter. Check out my stone. I always forget where I put it. So we'll figure out where I'm going to put that bench pin somewhere, and then you grab my my block vise here, and this is going to allow me to hold my blue sticky tack and my setting while I go ahead and use some cup burrs to round over those prongs. And in this case, it fits just nice, and I'm going to take my syringe of blade butter and to just hang on, wait for it, and just smush it down in there. So I like sound effects. Just gonna go ahead and quickly, this is sped up, this is not real time. I don't usually work that fast, but we're gonna go ahead and get those all cleaned up. And yeah, nice and pretty. Take this guy out. We're gonna go ahead and now remove the whole thing. I'm gonna snip the bottom parts off of this cullet. And now I have that guy. Now the piece that I discarded, put it on my bench, that's still in the shape of a teepee, that can be used to solder another one of these cullets onto. So just because you soldered one and cut it off doesn't mean you can't then use that to solder another cullet on. So you can do multiples with this. I'm going to use that sticky tack here to file down the bottom parts of that cullet. So if I were to solder this onto something flat, it would be flat. Or I could lay it flat and then attach a jump ring so I have a little pendant. This is perfect for that. So there we go. Should give you a nice little close-up of the flat surface. Wait for it. We're gonna put our cabochon in there, and then you would proceed with your either adding a jump ring or doing your stone setting or soldering that to a back plate, all that kind of fun stuff. And let's get a picture of that back of that thing, because it's pretty cool. Here we go. And back of the cullet. I was way off. There we go. So nice and finished. and that's perfect surface to solder onto another back plate or just finish it as is. It's a cool stamping surface. And then this is pretty much it for the basic solder template video. If you're interested in purchasing these, you can find them at lionpunchforge.com. As usual, thank you for watching, and if you haven't already, go ahead and hit that little red subscribe button, because I'd love to have you as a subscriber. So you guys have a great day, do something nice for somebody, and be amazing.